Rolling.
Oh, good. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Julie Martin. I'm the creative director of the of this project, which is the Novocastrian Time Machine. Ta-da! So, this is a document that I put together to show the possibilities of what were possible in terms of turning urban spaces into contemporary storytelling spaces. So this particular project focuses on Watt Street in Newcastle and was inspired by the surveys of Thomas Mitchell because of the locations in the past and the locations in the present. So in this particular project we decided to try to conjure the idea of the time machine and there being a rift within the time-space continuum so that current tourists, clients, whatever we wish to call them, can explore the streetscape and actually travel through time. Our influences for Newcastle were particularly the Industrial Revolution, I suppose with a mix of postmodernism, and in that context we do love our steampunk because it fits very well with Newcastle. So as an artistic style we chose that because it then was in keeping, I suppose, with the historical character of the street and with modern technology. So the idea of the infrastructure for a storytelling space is really multifaceted because we wanted to actually have a real physical presence in the street as well as having a virtual presence. And there's, I suppose, 3 layers that we were able to create in the design of this project so that not everyone had to have a smartphone or high technology to be able to experience the content. So we had 3 ways of delivering the content. So we had the broadest, I suppose, accessibility to the content being available on the web, via smartphones and in the street via various media, and then no media at all, just passive participation. So this was our original design concept for the time machine. This was inspired by the theodolite that Mitchell used, and essentially this is a virtual telescope here, where when you look through the telescope at the existing structures in the street, they would magically transform into what they looked like in the past. And maybe there's a dial on the time machine where you could choose a particular decade, and depending on budgets and stuff like that, when you look into the street you could actually have people, horse and carts or vintage cars, and you could actually recreate the whole street scene. So it's a living environment, not a dead passive environment, which I was always interested in. Oh, in our project we had this idea of the time traveller, so we sort of come up with this concept of Dr. Watt, and this is just some creative ideas for costuming and theming for Dr. Watt. And Dr. Watt as a character, I mean, he could also be a real actor, but also these days with 3D computer graphics and motion capture control equipment, he could be a generated character, so he could live all time beyond that of an individual actor. And he has the possibility with new technologies just to pop up in a phone via proximity. But you could be walking past somewhere and suddenly pop, he comes up in your phone and starts talking to you. As long as you've got Bluetooth enabled. This is a sort of design for our ultimate smartphone. We like the idea of having a free phone that operates between a particular time and it being accessible to anyone, doing anywhere in the world. And it's really interesting because something like this is probably $270 a month to run. Free phone calls anywhere in the world. And that, I love that idea because it really is a time device. You know, you're speaking to friends in London, you know, and you're up really late and they're up really early, or vice versa. But it's that whole steampunk philosophy as well. I also like the idea that there was a directory. It's interesting in regard to Watt Street, and that it actually acted as a guide in terms of the street as an interpretive device. So there was, you know, ways to incorporate all sorts of things. I mean, I also like the idea of letterboxing, you know, which is being able to turn the street into a gaming environment. And it was interesting because we uncovered this article here is actually about it was 1838 where they discovered a little box that was tucked away in a building, and so to me that was the original letterbox.
Yeah, I transcribed that thing.
Oh, did you? Well, I love that idea, and I want to have one in. I'd love to have one in.
Well,
Watt
we're still
Street.
trying to find the original letter. See, it disappeared. Might have disappeared in the in the Westpac archives, and I asked the Westpac archivist to look for me because it was discovered in the building when they were dismantling the site. So
yes.
It's an interesting little bit of paper.
I love that story, and I think to build on that would be really a fantastic thing. It's really quite cute. I also looked at the railway station and how I could change that at night time, because at night time it's a very alien, cold, uninviting environment, and I like to make urban environments really nice places to be in. And so I realised I could, just with even digital printing, I could transform the idea of the train station and use the train station as an interpretive device as well. And this is actually the Newcastle Flyer. So this is our train is actually from the 1950s and actually does come to Newcastle once a year.
So would that be a projection or?
No, I do that as a digital print.
As a digital print.
Yeah, simple technology at times to help theme an environment as such. So this is some of the historical information of what trains were like, which I think is quite fascinating.
Oh, that's an interesting one there. It looks like a combi bus.
It does. It's so cute, isn't it? Yes, and that actually used to work in the 50s and used to transport the rail staff to work and was on the train tracks, which was really cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is interesting because this is some of the sort of Victorian transport devices and things that people imagined, and the Merryweather steam tram motor and all sorts of devices. So I like the idea of transport past, present and also future, and I think in the idea of the time machine that the idea is that you can travel through time. And of course now we actually have, these things look quite bizarre, but really when you put that against a Segway, which is a contemporary device, suddenly these things sort of look like precursors. It's like they were imagining the future. So I love the idea of where you can tap into where people imagine the future, which is almost like a Jules Verne thing, and then you've actually got the future manifesting and becoming real. So it shows you that mad ideas aren't always necessarily mad. They're just really, future seeing, almost soothsayers in a way. This is interesting. This is just regarding trains and the Queen's visit. This is in the 50s. Honeysuckle train station and the relevance of, I suppose, trains and transport to Newcastle.
Okay. Yep.
We'd like the idea possibly outside or placed in a street where people are. See, the challenge is in streetscapes, there's locations where people already inhabit and there's places in the street where they don't inhabit, and so to redirect them is sort of like a switching exercise. So you need to be able to communicate to where people are and give them information and then sort of, entice them to go elsewhere. So this is just some of the historical papers from the time. And of course we love the Harry Potter style, where you've got a mixture of what looks like traditional media with virtual content mixed within it. So you're not quite sure what you're looking at in many respects.
Like a moving image within the paper.
Correct, yes. And actually they have done that now in the States. They've actually printed newspapers with moving images in it. So there's video paper that exists now.
Wow.
Yes. This was published, I think, last month. First one was published last month, with video in the newspaper.
Wow,
wow. And I also have 3 seconds of animation that I can put on paper as well as another technology.
Great.
And the idea of relevance in terms of history is very interesting because you've got to tap into the emotional context of real people, So that's why these images, and we've researched all these historical real estate images, because the people who are at the train station live in these places. So that's their suburb in the 50s, and this one's 1922. So if people are still alive, this would be their history.
Yeah.
Depending
These are all
on their
scanned
age.
from our collection too. We scanned 2.5 kilometres on them. So
my
it's great
goodness.
to see you putting them all to use.
Yes, thank you. Yes. And this is the idea of when looking through the time machine. The Great Northern has a lot of history with a lot of photos that exist, and it just is a different hotel at different decades, really, and also the characters. So, we like the idea of looking through the time machine and then being able to sort of dial back through history and see that building transform. And also, I wanted to see characters in the street as well, especially when they are natural storytellers, as with this Black Harris character, with a very famous character in the street. Of course, and then we go to the Great Northern, the sort of more, I suppose, grand things that happen there with regard to the Queen and the
It's like a Russian
ballrooms
palace.
Oh, it is. It's amazing.
It's in the 80s. It used to be a crash lounge for people. And
right.
so after you went to a show, you went up there and you just lounged around like kings and queens of Europe.
Fantastic. What a shame.
But they also had bands in there too.
Yeah. Oh,
but that's what I don't know. I don't
understand.
Well,
it's the fire requirement, because to upgrade is too expensive for it to comply to fire, or timber. So that's why they can't
sort
use
of fall
that.
into
It requires too much investment, I think, is the challenge. And
it's a real shame.
heritage. It's a beautiful place.
Oh, I absolutely love it there. And see, it's interesting with that whole further up Watt Street is the post office precinct and the different incarnations that corner site had at different times. But we also like the idea of, in terms of the history of tapping into, you know, having telephones or things that people can pick up and listen to stories and gossip and stuff, and trying to create this in a gaming environment almost in the street.
Yeah, because I only found out a couple of weeks ago the first telegraph connection was made from Watt Street to Sydney.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Bingle records it. It was sent from Bingle's office.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, so I thought, well, that was like connecting to the internet in the
1860s
or something like that.
That's right. Absolutely. That's right, because it's really quite fascinating. And then also you go to the first telephone devices in the street, and you think, well, this was sort of mobile telephony in its day, really. And it's funny because you could have a mobile telephone in its day. You just had to have the exchange. You just had to have a lot of equipment which took up the size of a building, really, and transatlantic cables, and you could just move your office. And so it's very interesting. And this is back to sort of steampunk devices and viewing devices and how to embed images in devices. And this is just a selection of images.
So these steampunk images, are these actual physical sculptures that people have created based upon? So some are sculptures and some are they all real sculptures based upon...
Real devices.
Oh, okay.
None of these are conceptual images.
Okay.
They are all actual devices, that are built. But it's a whole movement. And in this one here, people's using like an iPhone with stereoscopic images, and then they've actually made a stereoscopic viewer. So we've got the old with the new.
Yeah.
So it's quite fascinating, really. And then we go to a more contemporary context. This is in New York. So this is a stereoscopic viewer. This is made to be robust in a street context. And this one's in here to show that, yes, this isn't too far-fetched, you know, and they can exist and be robust and vandal-proof and stuff like that. So this is just some lighting, some street lighting. So we've sort of created concepts for our Illuminated extravaganza. Our team has worked on Vivid and a whole heap of other projects. So this is the original post office and telegraph office in Watt Street. And when I found this original photo, it had a whole... facade at the front, which doesn't exist anymore.
But the building's still there.
Yes.
They just,
which is amazing.
It's a shame, isn't it?
And I love all the old postcards as well, and the stories from the time period. And I was trying to find ways how they could be transcribed into the urbanscape, right, in that location. And I had done work before with Topiary and Moss art, and this is some examples. This isn't my work, but this is some examples of Moss art work where text is used. And so you can put these on heritage buildings, you see, and you're not defacing anything or damaging a building. So it's a wonderful way, I think, of being able to tell stories.
It looks really interesting.
That's great, And then just, if it dies, it just goes brown.
Vanishes.
So in looking at Watt Street in particular, there's certain buildings which are natural, we'll just call them projection screens for images, and the ability to try to transform. Now this is projection mapping, where, you know, you have a building as such, and, you know, you want to be able to use it as a storytelling space. So...
That's the David Madison, and that looks fantastic on the David Madison building. It's a curvy building.
Would work really well. And this is the old Nobby's.
I think they're going to demolish it, but aren't they?
Well, that new building?
Yeah, they're either going to develop it, they're going to put multi-stories. I don't know if they're going to fully demolish it, but
maybe
they might encompass it. But looking at it now, I think you've made it look really wonderful.
Oh, it would look fantastic at night time.
That would look great.
It would look absolutely fantastic at night time. And of course, you know, you can have a lot of content that can change over time. So part of it is being able to engage. In this concept, we had sort of at least 12 time-based themes. Oh, of course, and here we have our lovely little Muto scopes, which are viewing devices, and so we can, this is up near where the old Beaches Hotel was, so in Newcastle there's a great circus history.
So when people view into this thing, what are they actually seeing?
This is little viewing devices. These are genuine devices from the Victorian period. So in these, they actually had video, but video in its day inside, you see them circular, was paper, a bit like flick books, right? And you used to move something and they would rotate. But our plan was to sort of refurbish them internally and have 3D holographic illusions inside, so you'd look inside and you could see a whole world, or once again content that would be moving, video or even still images, but 3D. It had to be 3D, so you felt like there was that spatial relationship rather than just looking in there and seeing a flat picture, which is really not very engaging. This is just some of the historical images of shipping, the whole shipping thing. What was interesting in Watt Street, we then found that at 42 Watt Street there was this old livery stable there, and found this image, and so that's now where the blood bank is, and so in the virtual software, you know, with phone apps, you can then have the content on the phone, and then as you're walking down the street, you know, you can have the overlays of the virtual content over the real world, and
Tessa Morrison in Architecture is launching that next month. She's launching a virtual. They're using a software called Layer.
Oh yes.
If you go to that's underway, and we've got another bunch that are looking at doing.
I'm just using History Pen, which is free.
Because
they didn't really have budget.
This is free
too.
Yes. So they use the iPad thing.
Is that restricted to iPad?
No, it's any smartphone. It's a smartphone app, and our colleague Russell Rigby has geo-referenced all our snowball images, so they're all our snowball glass plates. So they move the image in front, much like what you're doing there, and up comes the geo-tag thing. That's a free app too, and so we've got so many people working on great things. We've got another Lost Newcastle mob that are working on all the interactive stuff, the people's memories type of side of things.
Yes, fantastic.
And
well, see, on those apps, sometimes you can have the audio as well and video, so then you can incorporate it. And I love the idea of the integration, because the stories is really quite interesting, I think.
So once you do the app, you load the app and then you scan it, and then that image then kicks it off. Then you can do it all over the place. So it sort of sets itself up based upon a test scan. That's how I think I understand it. But they're going to have an exhibition next month.
Oh, good.
But we're excited about that because
that sounds exciting.
Well, these are great. That's what I mean. We've got your project and all these other collaborative projects are really pushing all this stuff into new areas, which I find very exciting.
Yes, it is in terms of storytelling. And then it's interesting as well, because there's nothing stopping you if the content doesn't exist and you know the story might be an oral history story or something like that. Then I love this idea that it's, you know, you can suddenly put the history in there like that, and it's
scrap
okay.
of paper.
Why not? You know, it's just another really interesting way of being able to get content. Of course, I love chalk art as well, and the ability to tell stories. I mean, this is only relevant really because of time warps and the Newcastle earthquake, really.
But that's great too. I love that.
Oh, okay.
Back in the earth.
These are image bollards, and so I did like the idea of these image bollards looking like they're little time capsules of people inside them in their period dress outside specific historical locations, because then there's a context to the building and fashion, and people are always into fashion and clothing, so you know, either male or female. This is actually from the Livery Time Machine in London, the Sanborn collection. See, I love this. She's just walking in the street, and so suddenly you go, my goodness, if she was alive today, she'd be, you know, 180. And suddenly you feel more connected.
Yeah, going back to your booth in the previous slide, it always reminded me of those sorts of talking booths, you know, that you could actually listen to someone talk or interact with someone.
Yes.
Those ghostly things that happen in the Twilight Zone episodes, or even Harry Potter, where something that's inanimate suddenly comes to life and tells you something, you know, with their eyes looking down, so they're not actually looking at you.
Yes.
It's very ghostly and
it is.
And
it's pretty cool. And this is, this was in here because I like the idea of sort of trying to invigorate Enterprise Park I've looked at Enterprise Park, and I think it needs to be redeveloped to turn it into a cultural space, and it's very dark and scary at the moment, and I think it needs to be transformed into a really fun
I don't
space.
have any mental picture of Enterprise Park as a park.
No,
I don't
it's
have
just
any.
on the corner.
Nothing.
It's just on the corner opposite the pub and the train station, and it's a bit of a dead spot. Apart from when people are all after they've been raving late at night, go there after their alcohol-induced states, really. But this was a project I'd done in Sydney, and it was interactive, so the people actually got to determine the colours and patterns on the grass by movement sensors and interactive sound sensors, and the EcoCube was able to change colour based on interaction, and there was a lot of violence in this particular area, and when the Illuminated installation was installed, all violence stopped. And all the kids used to go there, or teens, or after all the pubs closed, they still went down there in their hundreds, but it sort of became like a contemporary sacred space for them. I felt like they began to own the space as their chill space. So then it was like, oh, let's meet down there, and then they could just sit and talk, and it was a groovy place to be, and so they weren't bored. I mean, really violence.
Well, the violence is the real problem with the city, and the city is getting punched and kicked at the moment because people are upset about something, and you do need something to either...
Yeah, you need to know how to manage that in the urban environment when people are discontent. So you either have to do a switching exercise, I think a psychological switching exercise, because people are bored, or if something is presented to them and it's not about them, then they're resentful. So there's this whole psychological thing around that. I like the idea of keyholes. This is where... really expansive technology can be used in really small, so it's really micro, little tiny things looking through keyholes where you can look through and then suddenly it's like a whole world inside. So then you've got a really big storytelling space again, and it's not taking up much geographical space, not much physical space. So suddenly, you can have, in this case, you can have virtual worlds, fantasy worlds, and I love the idea that these worlds are constructed by the current inhabitants of the culture. So I'd love to see the architectural students and the art students involved, and even potentially involved with their curriculum, come up with new worlds of the future.
Every year they do. They come up with beautiful uses for spaces and places, and it just gets wasted. It's like they just spill on the ground, and no one. I just thought come on, do one of them. Just put one of them. Make one of these great visions a reality.
Yes.
Because they pick a spot in Newcastle every time, and at the end of the year, it's fourth year, and the designs they come up with are just magnificent.
But the designs are contained within the university. They need to be able to be experienced in the street. So the information is locked within this environment. So to get the information out, in my view, you need to really have something on the street in the location, i.e. the virtual binocular, because then in that context you could be looking at the existing architecture, and then suddenly this whole futuristic vision could look like it's actually there. And I think that's why I really love the virtual binocular idea. And this is just obviously fantasy worlds.
I like that about Newcastle in 1,000 years' time, because that was another thing that we experimented with, was push into the future and see what possibilities there are.
I love that idea. I think it's inspiring. This was just some steel cutouts to try to activate that lumberyard space, because there's a very dead space down there. And now I went down there and had a look the other night, and all the trees have overgrown, so you don't even get the silhouette anymore.
No.
It's completely lost. So all that investment, to my mind, is not being protected, really. And but it's not an animated site, so it doesn't tell the story.
No.
And so I felt like it needed these characters there to tell the story.
Yeah, because in Bingle's account, apparently an arsonist was running around in the 1850s and set fire to the Stockton Tweed factory, then within days set fire to the Convict Lumberyard and burned them to the ground. They caught him, but they didn't have enough evidence to convict him.
Okay.
But,
These are just other steel cutouts. This was some of our artistic team. This project's done in Tasmania. This is real. They're not mock-ups. Now, this is interesting. This is a conceptual image of what we could do with lighting to reconstruct the old George Hotel, which got demolished, and with that new building there. So that's the old George Hotel reconstructed on the right there, over that, on top of the new building. And we could do that with light projection to do that. reconstruct that.
Well, that building has featured in the Lost Newcastle on Facebook. People have been putting that image up. And
yes, well, there's a lot of history around that. There's just some sculptural elements, and this was some ideas maybe for the park, just to explore some things. Here's just the other, with the moss art again, storytelling, different concepts. And these are just some decorative techniques for, low maintenance in parks and things to make them interesting. So steel cutouts. Only because at night time, I suppose, with steel cutouts, they could make huge, big shadows and provide dynamic. And it being a city built on steel, I like the idea of working with big old industrial junk that, could be reinterpreted. These are just some ideas for street furniture in Enterprise Park that's more organic, fun and stuff, instead of the old-fashioned park bench idea. So there's some more contemporary sort of moulded bound shapes. So essentially that was our creative effort.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting and exciting.
Oh, thanks.